The obsidian grandeur of the high stratagem of the Valkyr ascendancy was usually a place of absolute, crystalline silence, a vacuum of sound, where the fate of star systems was decided with the cold precision of a surgeon's scalpel. But today the silence was heavy, textured with a suffocating dread that pressed against the respiratory vents of the Empire's most powerful leaders. The air, usually scrubbed to a sterile chill, felt thick with the pheromones of anxiety, a biochemical panic that betrayed the biological roots of even the most augmented admirals and ministers seated around the sprawling, monolithic table of dark glass. Above them, the holographic dome, a construct of pure light and hard data, displayed the sector map, a swirling galaxy of blue and gold territories that had stood inviolate for 3,000 cycles. But there, piercing the outer rim like a heated needle through wax, was a red trajectory, a single, unwavering vector that defied every protocol of diplomatic engagement and every law of sensible survival. It was a ship, one ship. But the readings scrolling down the peripheral screens described a vessel of such impossible mass and energetic output that the cogitator banks were struggling to classify it as a vehicle. They wanted to classify it as a rogue moon, or a tectonic event, or a natural disaster that had somehow grown engines and a hateful will. The gathered high exarchs, the war ministers, and the first speakers of the constituent species stared at the red line, their compound eyes and optical sensors widening in a synchronized display of terror that no amount of imperial discipline could mask. "It does not hail," War Minister Calith hissed, his voice a grinding of chitin plates, his four arms twitching toward the interface console embedded in the obsidian surface. "It does not broadcast a diplomatic code. It does not decelerate. It moves with the momentum of a planetary fragment. This is not a greeting, High Exarch. This is an execution." Calith's assessment, though born of a militaristic paranoia that defined his caste, was difficult to refute given the telemetry. The object was moving at a percentage of light speed that should have torn a vessel of that size apart, shielding itself not with elegant energy screens, but with a brute force magnetic field so dense it was stripping the solar wind from the stars it passed. The Valkyr had encountered the humans, the Deathworlders from the high-gravity hellscape of Sol, only briefly, in fleeting trade exchanges and distant sensor ghosts. They were known to be a species of contradictions, volatile yet patient, soft-skinned yet bone-dense, capable of horrific violence and baffling altruism. But the Valkyr Department of Defense, the supreme authority on threat assessment, had categorized them as a Class 4 civilization, barely warp-capable, industrially crude, and politically fractured. This assessment was now disintegrating in real time. The ship approaching their capital world was not crude. It was a monstrosity of engineering that implied a mastery of physics the Valkyr scientists had declared theoretically impossible. High Exarch Valen, the oldest living member of the Council, whose skin was translucent with age and whose mind was linked directly to the planetary defense grid, raised a trembling hand to forestall the War Minister's panic. "It is one vessel, Calith," Valen said, though his voice lacked the resonance of command. "If they intended war, they would send a fleet. They would send armadas to darken our skies. To send one ship implies a message, or a test." But even as he spoke, Valen felt the hollowness of his own logic. In the history of the galaxy, no species sent a ship of this magnitude, a vessel that sensors indicated was carrying a payload capable of cracking a planetary crust, merely to deliver a message. The designation of the ship, decoded from the crude, brutalist transponder signal that was finally piercing the interference, scrolled across the center of the room. It was not a name of grace, nor of poetic ambition. It was a statement. The humans had named this Leviathan the weight of consequence. The name alone sent a ripple of unease through the translation matrix, the linguistic algorithms struggling to convey the specific, heavy emotional context of the human words. It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. "The Department of Defense has already mobilized the home fleet," Calith continued, his mandibles clicking rapidly. "We have moved the orbital platforms into a kill-box formation. We can vaporize it the moment it drops out of supercruise. We must strike first. The Deathworlders respect only force. Their history is a blood-soaked tapestry of kinetic impacts and nuclear fire. If we show hesitation, they will view it as weakness." The stratagem grew darker as the hologram zoomed in on the object. Long-range optical telescopes had finally resolved an image. It was an ugly thing. It possessed none of the sleek curves of Valkyr ships, none of the aesthetic beauty of the Ilari gliders. It was a block of gray, scarred metal, a flying city of guns and armor plates, shaped like a hammerhead, vast and unyielding. It looked like it had been built not in a shipyard, but forged in the heart of a dying star and beaten into shape by angry gods. It was a ship designed to take punishment, a ship designed to fly through hell and arrive burning on the other side. "Hold fire," Valen commanded, the authority returning to his voice as he sensed the precipice they were standing upon. "You assume this is an invasion. Look at the energy signature, Calith. Look at it closely." The High Exarch gestured with a long, slender finger toward the spectral analysis. "It is not charging weapons. The emissions are coming from its core, yes, but they are not thermal lances. They are containment fields. Whatever is inside that ship is not a battery of lasers. It is something else. Something volatile." The council leaned in, the tension stretching tight as a wire across the room. The sheer scale of the human vessel made their own dreadnoughts look like toys. If that ship contained a weapon, and if it detonated, it wouldn't just destroy a city, it could sterilize the biosphere. The humans had sent a bomb. That was the prevailing thought in the room. A doomsday device delivered to the doorstep of the alien Department of Defense to demand surrender before a single shot was fired. "They are hailing us," the communications officer announced, her voice trembling so violently that the translator struggled to stabilize her tone. "Audio only, wideband. They are bypassing the encryption. They are not asking for a channel. They are taking it." The stratagem lights flickered, the ambient hum of the station dropping an octave as the immense power of the human transmission overwhelmed the local grid. Static washed over the room, the sound of cosmic radiation and magnetic storms before a voice cut through the noise. It was a human voice, deep, resonant, laced with the gravel of high-gravity vocal cords, sounding tired and infinitely old. "This is Admiral Stacker of the Terran Coalition vessel Weight of Consequence," the voice boomed, filling the chamber, vibrating the very glass of the table. "We are entering your system orbit. Do not fire. We are not here to negotiate your surrender. We are not here to debate your borders. We are here because your sensors are blind and your time is up. We require immediate synchronization with your high command. You have 6 standard minutes to comply before we initiate the protocol. Stacker out." The transmission cut as abruptly as it had begun, leaving a silence that was more terrifying than the noise. The sheer arrogance of it, the demand, the dismissal of their sovereignty, the cryptic reference to a protocol, stunned the Valkyr leadership into momentary paralysis. "Your time is up," Calith roared, slamming his fist onto the table, cracking the obsidian. "They threaten us with extinction in our own house. This is a declaration of war. Activate the singularity drivers. Burn them from the sky before they can initiate this protocol." The room erupted into chaos, shouting voices overlapping, fear turning into aggression, the instinct to survive overriding the logic of diplomacy. But Valen sat still, his eyes fixed on the red dot that was now crossing the final threshold of their defense perimeter. The humans had said their sensors were blind. That phrase gnawed at him. The Valkyr possessed the most advanced sensor arrays in the quadrant. They could detect a neutrino shift 3 sectors away. What could the humans possibly see that the Ascendancy could not? "Wait," Valen whispered, but the room was too loud. He stood up, amplifying his voice through his neural link, a psychic shout that slammed into the minds of every being in the room. "Silence!" The mental command brought the council to a shuddering halt. "If they wanted to destroy us, Calith, they would have done it from deep space. They have the mass to launch kinetic strikes that we would never see coming. They are here within range of our guns, exposing themselves. Why? Why bring a ship of that value into the teeth of our defense grid unless the proximity is necessary for the task?" Valen looked at the screen. The human ship was decelerating. It was parking itself directly above the capital city, hovering like a darkly clouded moon, casting a shadow that plunged the Imperial Palace into twilight. "Let them land," Valen ordered, his voice cold. "If we fire now and we fail to destroy them instantly, they will rain fire upon the city. We cannot risk a partial kill on a vessel of that density. Let them come down. Let us see these Deathworlders face to face. Let us see what protocol requires such a monstrous machine." The War Minister vibrated with suppressed rage, his mandibles twitching, but he signaled the stand-down. The orbital gun. Powered down, their targeting locks disengaging with reluctant whines. The atmosphere in the stratagem shifted from frantic panic to a heavy, waiting dread. The humans were coming down. The shuttle that descended from the belly of the Weight of Consequence was as ugly as its mothership. It was a brick of ablative armor, scorched by atmospheric entry, descending on pillars of blue flame that roared with the violence of a chemical rocket, eschewing the silent anti-gravity drives of the Valkyr. It landed on the pristine landing platform of the Imperial Spire with a crash that cracked the pavement, the heavy landing gear groaning under the weight. Steam hissed from its vents, shrouding the craft in a fog of superheated vapor. The council watched from the safety of the observation deck, behind layers of blast glass. The ramp dropped with a metallic clang that echoed like a gunshot. Out walked the humans. There were 5 of them. They wore powered armor that looked less like military gear and more like industrial hazard suits, bulky, pressurized, covered in reinforced plating painted a dull, matte gray. They carried no visible weapons in their hands, but the suits themselves were weapons, powered by microreactors, magnifying the already formidable strength of the Deathworlders. The leader, presumably Admiral Stacker, walked in the center. He removed his helmet as he approached the airlock, revealing a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in a sandstorm. He was old, his hair cropped short and gray, his eyes dark and sunken, surrounded by the spiderweb scars of radiation exposure or perhaps just the stress of a life lived under crushing gravity. He moved with a deliberate slowness, the heavy thud of his magnetic boots on the deck vibrating through the floor. When they entered the stratagem, the contrast was jarring. The Valkyr were tall, slender, elegant beings of chitin and light, dressed in robes of silk and energy weave. The humans were tanks of flesh and metal, smelling of ozone and recycled air. Stacker stopped at the end of the long table, looking up at the high dais where Valen sat. The human did not bow. He did not offer a gesture of submission. He simply looked at them, his gaze sweeping over the council with a terrifying lack of fear. It was the look of a man who had seen things so terrible that a room full of alien warlords registered as a minor inconvenience. "You have a nice view," Stacker said, his voice unamplified yet filling the acoustic perfection of the room. He gestured vaguely at the panoramic window behind Valen, which looked out over the glittering metropolis. "Ideally, we'd like to keep it that way." "You have violated our sovereign space," Kalith spat, stepping forward, his towering form looming over the human. "You have threatened the High Council. You have brought a warship into our capital. Explain yourself, Deathworlder, or your life ends here." Stacker looked at the War Minister, then slowly, deliberately reached into a pouch on his belt. Kalith's guards raised their energy pikes, the hum of lethal voltage filling the air. Stacker ignored them. He pulled out a small, primitive data drive and tossed it onto the obsidian table. It skidded across the glass and stopped in front of Valen. "That's not a warship," Stacker said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "And we aren't here to invade you, we're here to save you, but frankly, we debated whether it was worth the fuel." He looked around the room, his eyes hard. "Your Department of Defense is obsessed with the borders of your empire. You watch the other nations. You watch the trade lanes. You watch us, but you aren't watching the basement." Valen picked up the drive and inserted it into the reader. The holographic dome flickered, the map of the galaxy vanishing, replaced by a complex, rotating simulation of the Valkyr home system. But there was something wrong with the sun. Deep inside the spectral rendering of their star, there was a dark, pulsing anomaly. A parasite. "What is this?" Valen asked, his breath catching. "It's a resonance cascade," Stacker explained, uncrossing his arms and leaning against the table, the servomotors in his suit whining softly. "We call it a void-eater phenomenon. It's a subspatial fracture that feeds on stellar fusion. It's been eating your star from the inside out for the last 50 years. Your sensors rely on light and radiation, so you didn't see it because the fracture eats the evidence. We rely on gravity. We felt the mass shift from 10 light-years away." The room fell silent. The scientists in the back were already scrambling, running calculations, checking the human data against their own raw feeds. One of them, a young astrophysicist, turned pale, his skin flushing a terrified violet. He looked up at Valen and nodded, a slow, jerky motion of confirmation. The horror settled into the room like lead. Their son was dying, not in millions of years, but soon. "How soon?" Valen asked, his voice a whisper. 3 hours, Stacker said, checking the chronometer on his wrist. "Give or take a few minutes for quantum variance. The core will collapse, the star will undergo a prematurely induced supernova, and this entire system will be vaporized. Your fleets, your cities, your history, gone." Kalith staggered back, the aggression draining from him, replaced by the hollow shock of a soldier realizing the enemy isn't on the battlefield, but in the sky itself. This is a trick, a fabrication." "We brought a ship the size of a mountain to your doorstep," Stacker said, his voice sharpening. "You think we did that for a prank? That ship, the weight of consequence, isn't a dreadnought. It's a stellar anchor. It's a localized gravity well generator. We built it to drag dead stars into new orbits, or in this case, to perform open-heart surgery on a living one." The human admiral stepped closer, his face illuminated by the holographic projection of the dying sun. We are Deathworlders. You call us that because we come from a planet that tries to kill us every day. Tornadoes, earthquakes, volcanoes, predators. We survive because we learned to be harder than the world. But we also learned that nature doesn't care about your politics. It doesn't care about your borders or your pride. When the storm comes, you either build a shelter or you die. You people. You've lived in a garden for too long. You forgot to look for the storm. You can stop it, Valen asked, looking at the human with a mix of awe and suspicion. You have the technology to stabilize a star. We have the technology to try, Stacker corrected. But it requires us to park the ship inside the corona. We have to drop the anchor directly into the fracture. It's going to get hot. Why? Calith asked, his voice trembling. Why do this? You owe us nothing. We have taxed your trade routes. We have blocked your expansion. We have treated you as savages. Why risk a ship of that magnitude and the lives of your crew for us? Stacker paused. He looked at his fellow humans who stood silently behind him. Then he looked back at the aliens. For the first time, his expression softened just a fraction. Because the universe is empty enough as it is, Stacker said. And because we don't run from the dark, we fight it, even when it's not our dark. He tapped his helmet. We need full clearance. Lower your shields, all of them. The magnetic interference from your defense grid is messing with our targeting scanners. If we miss the injection point by a millimeter, we accelerate the supernova instead of stopping it. You have to trust us, completely, and you have to do it now. The tension in the room was palpable. To lower the shields was to leave the planet naked before a ship that could destroy it in a heartbeat. It was the ultimate gamble. Calith looked at Valen. The War Minister was a creature of war, but he was also a creature of duty. He saw the data. He saw the truth in the human's tired eyes. Lower the shields, Calith ordered, his voice breaking. Deactivate the grid, give them the sky. Protocol initiated, Stacker said into his comms. Begin the descent. The humans didn't leave the stratagem. They stayed, watching the screen as their ship, the weight of consequence, began to move. It didn't turn around. It accelerated. It rose from the atmosphere and shot toward the sun, a black arrow flying into a furnace. The room watched in silence as the ship grew smaller, a speck against the blinding brilliance of the star. The next 2 hours were an eternity of waiting. The Valkyr watched the telemetry. They saw the ship enter the outer corona. Shields flared, stripping away layers of armor. The heat was unimaginable. The weight of consequence was shaking, its structural integrity groaning under the tidal forces of the star. Hull temperature at critical, a technician announced. They are burning, the outer layers are vaporizing. Stacker stood stoically, listening to the chatter in his ear. Hold it steady, helmsman, don't flinch. You're walking into the fire, keep walking. The ship plunged deeper. It was no longer a ship. It was a mote of dust in a hurricane of plasma. The alien council watched, horrified and mesmerized. The humans were flying into hell. They were doing it with a calm, methodical precision that was more terrifying than any berserker rage. They were calculating the math of their own survival while burning alive. Target lock achieved, Stacker whispered. Deploy the anchor. On the screen, the ship shuddered. From its belly, a sphere of pure darkness dropped. It was a singularity containment unit, a device so dense that for a fleeting second, the sensors registered it as a black hole. It fell into the star, straight toward the dark fracture that was killing it. Impact in 3, 2, 1. The screen went white, the sensors overloaded. For a terrifying moment, everyone in the room thought they were dead. They thought the star had exploded. But then the light faded. The filters re-engaged. The star was still there, but the dark spot was gone. The violent tremors in the photosphere had ceased. The star burned with a clean, steady gold. Stabilization confirmed, the technician breathed, tears running down his face. The fracture is sealed, the core is resetting, they fixed it. By the void, they fixed the sun. A cheer did not erupt. The moment was too big for cheering. It was a moment of religious silence. The Valkyr looked at the humans with wide, trembling eyes. They had expected monsters. They had expected conquerors. Instead, they had been visited by gods in gray armor who had reached into the fire and pulled them back from the brink of extinction. Status of the ship, Valen asked, his voice barely audible. Critical damage, the technician reported. They are adrift in the corona. Engines are offline. They are caught in the gravity well. They cannot escape. Valen turned to Stacker. Your ship, it is trapped. Stacker nodded slowly. We knew the return trip was unlikely. The anchor takes a lot of power to deploy. We blew the main drive to seal the breach. You sacrificed yourselves? Calith asked, stepping forward, his alien face contorted with confusion and grief. You came here to die for us. Stacker chuckled a dry, rasping sound. Not if I can help it. We're Deathworlders, remember? We're hard to kill. He tapped his comms again. Launch the secondary boosters. Jettison the outer hull. Blow the shell. On the screen, the charred ruin of the weight of consequence exploded. But it wasn't a destruction. The outer layers of armor, the massive guns, the heavy plating, it all blew outward, shattered by explosive bolts. And from the wreckage, a smaller, sleeker ship emerged. It was the core of the vessel, stripped of its weight, shining and silver. Riding the shockwave of its own shedding, it blasted out of the gravity well, surfing the solar flare like a leaf on the wind. It was a maneuver of such reckless insanity that the Valkyr pilots in the room gasped. It was suicide. It was brilliance. It was human. The core ship arched away from the sun, smoking and battered, but alive. It limped back toward the planet, its engines sputtering but holding. We'll need a tow, Stacker said, finally sitting down on one of the ornate chairs, the adrenaline fading, leaving him exhausted. And maybe a drink, something strong. Valen looked at the human, then at the council. The arrogance was gone. The fear was gone. In its place was a profound, shaking humility. The aliens had spent centuries building walls, building fleets, fearing the chaos of the universe. The humans had embraced the chaos. They had built ships to fight the universe itself. You shall have it, Valen said, bowing low, a gesture reserved only for the highest emperors. You shall have whatever you desire. The Valkyr ascendancy stands in your debt. Today we have seen the true nature of the Deathworlders. Calith, the war minister who had wanted to vaporize them, walked up to Stacker. He removed his sash of office, a ribbon of woven light that signified his command over the armies of the Empire, and laid it on the table before the human. There is no weapon in our armory that equals your spirit, Calith said. We feared your ship was a destroyer of worlds. We did not know it was a savior of them. Stacker looked at the sash, then up at the alien. It's both, he said softly. It depends on who's standing in the way. Today it was the sun, tomorrow, well, let's hope there is no tomorrow like today. The diplomatic fallout was immediate and transformative. The news that humanity had saved the Valkyr capital star spread through the galaxy faster than hyperlight comms could carry it. The perception of the Terran coalition shifted overnight from dangerous primitives to cosmic guardians. But the story did not end there. In the weeks that followed, while the weight of consequence, or what was left of it, was being repaired in the Valkyr orbital yards, the aliens working side by side with human engineers, marveling at the insane redundancy and durability of human tech, a new discovery was made. The humans hadn't just sealed the star. The anchor they had dropped into the core was transmitting. It was sending data back to the surface. Deep scan data. By stabilizing the star, the humans had turned the sun itself into a massive sensor array, using the plasma field to amplify signals from outside the galaxy. Valen and Stacker stood once again in the stratagem, looking at a new hologram. This one didn't show the sector. It showed the void beyond the galactic rim, the dark space between galaxies. We didn't just come here to save your son, Stacker admitted, his voice quiet. We came because we were tracking a signal. We thought it was the fracture causing the noise, but now that the star is quiet, E can hear it clearly. Hear what? Valen asked, looking at the jagged waveform pulsing on the screen. The echo, Stacker said. The fracture in your sun wasn't natural, it was induced. Something tried to blow your star up to clear a path. A path for what? Stacker pointed to the edge of the map, where the darkness was deepest. For them. The sensors, boosted by the stabilized sun, picked up the shadows. Massive, silent shapes moving in the intergalactic void. Not one ship, not a fleet. A migration. They were billions of light years away, but they were coming. The Void Eaters weren't just a phenomenon, they were a precursor. The realization hit the room with the force of a physical blow. The Valkyr had been afraid of the humans. They had been afraid of a single ship. But the humans had known the real scale of the threat all along. They had been preparing. The weight of consequence wasn't just a repair vessel. It was the first step in a fortification line. They are coming for the light, Stacker said. They consume high-energy states, stars, civilizations. We've seen the ruins of galaxies they've stripped bare. That's why we build our ships like this. That's why we don't have mercy. Because the things out there, they don't even know what mercy is. Valen looked at the terrified faces of his council, then at the stoic, scarred face of the human admiral. He realized then that the politics of the galaxy, the petty squabbles over borders and trade, were over. The childhood of their species was over. "What do we do?" Valen asked. It was no longer a question from a superior to an inferior. It was a question from a soldier to a veteran. Stacker smiled, a grim, dangerous smile that showed teeth. "We build," Stacker said. "We build more ships, bigger ones. We fortify every star in this sector. We turn this galaxy into a fortress of thorns. You have the resources, we have the designs, and we have the will." He looked out at the stars, which suddenly seemed fragile, like candles in a wind. "The Deathworlders sent a dangerous ship," Stacker said, echoing the fear the aliens had felt only hours ago. "But you're going to need a lot more of them. The long night is coming, High Exarch, but we aren't afraid of the dark. We were born in it." The alliance that was forged that day was not signed with ink on paper. It was forged in the understanding of a shared nightmare. The Valkyr opened their armories to the humans. The humans shared the secrets of their gravity drives and their ablative armor. The galaxy stopped fighting itself and turned its eyes outward, toward the encroaching dark. And floating in the high orbit of the Valkyr homeworld, the scarred, half-destroyed hull of the Weight of Consequence remained. A monument, a warning, and a promise. A symbol that when the universe tried to kill you, you didn't beg for mercy. You built a bigger hammer and you hit back. The story of the dangerous ship became a legend in the Valkyr nurseries. They told their hatchlings that the Deathworlders were monsters, yes, but they were their monsters. And when the monsters from the dark came to eat the stars, the Deathworlders would be waiting, standing in the doorway, blocking the path, with no mercy in their hearts for anything that threatened the light. The silence in the stratagem was no longer heavy with fear. It was heavy with purpose. The work had begun. The engineering teams were already laying the keels for the new fleet. They called the first of the new class of joint vessels the Aegis of Saul, but the Valkyr had a different name for it in their own tongue. They called it the Mercy of the Monster. Because sometimes, the only mercy the universe allowed was a swift death to your enemies, and the humans were very, very good at delivering it. As Stacker walked back to the shuttle to oversee the repairs, Kalith walked beside him. "Admiral," the alien warlord said, "when they arrive, the Void Eaters, do you believe we can win?" Stacker stopped. He looked at the alien, then up at the sun, which was burning bright and stable in the sky. "Win," Stacker mused. "I don't know about winning, but I know this, we're going to make them choke on us." And for the first time in the history of the Valkyr ascendancy, the War Minister laughed. It was a harsh, clicking sound, but it was genuine. It was the laughter of a survivor. "Then let them come," Kalith said. "We have the Deathworlders, and we are no longer afraid." The galaxy spun on, moving inevitably toward the confrontation that would define the next epoch. But on one world, under the light of a saved sun, two species stood together, watching the horizon, ready to burn the sky to keep the darkness at bay. The dangerous ship had done its job. It had woken the galaxy up, and now the real war could begin. The silence of the void was deep, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with the sound of forges, the hum of reactors, and the beating hearts of a billion warriors. Preparing for the end of days, the Deathworlders had arrived, and they had brought their war with them, not against the aliens, but for them. And that made all the difference in the universe. The High Exarch returned to his seat, wiped the data drive, and placed it in a stasis box. It would be placed in the Imperial Archives, titled simply First Contact. But in his mind, he gave it a different title, one that fit the humans better. The day the mountains moved. He looked at the tactical map one last time. The red vector was gone. The Weight of Consequence was now a friendly green dot pulsing steadily in orbit, a heartbeat, a guardian, a friend. Valen closed his eyes and let out a long breath. The panic was gone, the politics were gone, only the mission remained. "Get me the manufacturing output for the outer colonies," he ordered his staff. "And get me a coffee, black, like the Admiral drinks it." The cultural exchange had already begun, and it tasted bitter, hot, and full of caffeine. It tasted like survival. From the observation deck, Stacker watched the city lights flicker on as the evening approached. He was tired. His bones ached. But he smiled. They hadn't fired a shot. They hadn't killed a soul. They had saved a world with a scary ship and a bluff about a protocol that was really just a standard engineering maneuver, albeit a dangerous one. "Not bad for a bunch of apes," he muttered to himself. "Admiral," his XO asked over the comms. "Nothing, Lieutenant," Stacker said. Just thinking it's going to be a long century. Yes, sir, but at least we have company. That we do. Stacker turned away from the window and headed deeper into the ship. There was work to do. The engine core needed a rebuild, the hull needed plating, and he had a meeting with a war minister about how to install a kinetic driver on a diplomatic cruiser. The dangerous ship sat in the dark, a silent vigil, a promise of violence to the enemies of life, and a promise of hope to its friends. No mercy for the wicked, no mercy for the entropy, just cold, hard steel and the stubborn will of humanity. And that was enough, for now,